The Studebaker Champ pickup, produced between 1960 and 1964, remains one of the most fascinating vehicles in the history of American trucks. It represents not only the ambition of a company fighting desperately to survive in a market dominated by the giants, but also the stubborn creativity that defined Studebaker during its final years. While the Champ is loved today for its unique design, its rarity, and its unmistakable personality, owners from its time and collectors today know that the truck carried with it a set of chronic issues. These defects were not simply technical oversights. They were the direct result of an automaker working with limited money, outdated equipment, and a shrinking engineering department. As a result, the truck that was meant to save Studebaker from collapse ended up revealing the vulnerabilities of a company that had almost no room for mistakes. Yet, even with these problems, the Champ became a symbol of individuality, nostalgia, and eccentric charm, which is perhaps the greatest irony of all. Understanding the 5 main defects of the Studebaker Champ requires going back to the conditions under which the truck was built. By 1960, Studebaker had already endured years of financial losses, internal restructuring, and increasing competition from Ford, Chevrolet, and Dodge. The company could not afford an all-new pickup design, so engineers were instructed to create a modern truck using as many existing parts as possible. This is why the Champ ended up with the front section of the Studebaker Lark passenger car, a decision that was both brilliant and problematic. It allowed the vehicle to look fresh compared to the aging Studebaker Transtar trucks, but it also introduced structural and mechanical mismatches that owners quickly noticed. The Lark front clip gave the Champ a car-like appearance that many buyers appreciated, but behind this modern styling were components never designed for the stresses of truck duty. That mismatch between design intention and real-world use is the origin of many of the Champ's most persistent defects. One of the issues frequently mentioned by early owners was the weakness of the front suspension. Since the Champ used the same basic suspension as the Studebaker Lark sedan, it was not built to handle heavy loads, rough work environments, or repeated stress on uneven terrain. While light-duty users appreciated the comfortable, car-like ride, owners who tried to use the truck for typical pickup-style work often found the suspension wearing prematurely. Bushings deteriorated quickly, ball joints loosened, and alignment issues became common. The suspension simply was not engineered for the kind of punishment that farmers, construction workers, or small business owners expected a truck to endure. This was a consequence of necessity rather than choice. Studebaker did not have enough money to design a new truck-specific suspension, so they repurposed what they had. The result was a compromise that made sense on paper but proved flawed in real use. Another chronic defect connected to the reuse of car components was the steering system. It offered a nice, light feel when the truck was unloaded, but under weight it became unpredictable, vague, and prone to excessive play. Drivers described the sensation as floating, especially at higher speeds or on rough surfaces. The problem became worse as front suspension wear accumulated, leading to a combination that many mechanics considered inherently unstable. This contributed to the Champ's reputation as a truck that demanded more frequent maintenance than its rivals. Ford and Chevrolet pickups of the same era were known for their rugged steering and strong front ends, while Studebakers felt delicate by comparison. Still, for buyers attracted to the Champ's personality rather than its workload capacity, the light steering felt pleasant, but it reinforced the idea that the Champ was trying to be both a car and a truck and succeeding at neither perfectly. Studebaker's engines during this period were generally reliable, but the Champ suffered from another major defect: heat management. Whether equipped with the 6-cylinder engine or the V8, the truck was known for running hot, especially during long uphill drives or when carrying heavy loads. The cooling system was adequate for car use but borderline for heavier truck applications. Radiators clogged easily, coolant hoses tended to deteriorate quickly under high thermal pressure, and water pumps were sometimes overwhelmed. On hot summer days, especially in western states, overheating incidents were common enough that mechanics grew accustomed to seeing Champs pulled into their shops with steaming hoods. The issue did not necessarily stem from poor engineering. Rather, it reflected Studebaker's struggle to adapt existing components to demanding conditions for which they were not originally designed. Over time, owners learned to adopt preventive habits, keeping radiators scrupulously clean, flushing the cooling system frequently, and avoiding extended periods of low-speed hauling. Nevertheless, the Champ never escaped the reputation of running hotter than it should. Perhaps one of the most frequently mentioned defects concerns the truck's rust problems. Studebaker vehicles of the late 1950s and early 1960s were notorious for using sheet metal that rusted more quickly than that of competitors. This was due partly to cost-cutting in material selection and partly to less advanced corrosion protection compared to Ford or Chevrolet. The Champ, with its mix of Lark front-end panels and older truckbed components, seemed especially vulnerable. The lower front fenders, door bottoms, cab corners, and bed sides were all common rust zones. In cold states where winter road salt was heavily used, the Champ deteriorated rapidly. Many trucks were less than 5 years old before holes began appearing. This dramatically reduced resale value and made the Champ less attractive to buyers who expected a work truck to hold up structurally. Today, survivors of the model are rare not only because production numbers were limited but because rust consumed so many of them long before collectors thought to preserve them. The problem was not unique to the Champ. Several Studebaker models from that era rusted prematurely, but on a truck, where buyers expected durability above all else, the defect was magnified. Another persistent issue was the transmission durability. Studebaker offered both manual and automatic options, but neither was ideal for heavy-duty use. The 3-speed manual was generally reliable but had weak synchronizers that wore out if drivers frequently shifted under load. The automatic transmissions, especially the early Flight-O-Matic units, struggled with the torque demands of truck use. Overheating, slipping, and delayed engagement were common complaints. These problems were exacerbated when owners used the Champ for towing, a task for which the drivetrain was never properly optimized. Studebaker simply did not have the resources to develop a truck-specific gearbox or modify their existing units significantly. As a result, owners learned to treat the Champ with gentleness rather than the roughness normally associated with pickup trucks. This created a strange situation: a truck that could perform retail deliveries, farm errands, or basic hauling but balked at true heavy-duty tasks. It felt more like a utility car than a conventional pickup. Despite these issues, the Champ had qualities that endeared it to many of its owners. The interior, borrowed from the Lark, was surprisingly comfortable, offering a level of refinement that Ford and Chevrolet trucks could not match at the time. The ride was smoother, the cabin quieter, and the overall driving experience more pleasant for commuters or small business owners who spent long hours behind the wheel. The truck also featured the innovative sliding window space-side bed, which was sourced from Dodge and offered a more modern and practical design than Studebaker's older bed options. For buyers who valued style and uniqueness over absolute toughness, the Champ delivered an experience unmatched by mainstream trucks. Yet, these strengths could not fully offset the mechanical and structural weaknesses that formed the core of the model's reputation. The final years of the Champ's production were colored by Studebaker's accelerating financial decline. Engineering budgets shrank even further, suppliers were uncertain, and the company struggled to meet rising expectations in the increasingly competitive truck market. Buyers were gravitating toward more powerful engines, stronger suspensions, and higher payload capacities, all areas in which the Champ lagged behind. Even so, Studebaker attempted to improve the truck gradually. Some suspension components were reinforced, cooling system improvements were introduced, and build quality saw occasional upticks depending on production batches. But the company lacked the stability needed to fully correct the truck's inherent flaws. By the time production ended in 1964, the Champ had become a symbol of Studebaker's resilience but also of the company's outdated facilities and limited resources. Collectors today often discuss the 5 major defects of the Studebaker Champ because they define the truck's character. Its weaknesses are inseparable from its identity, and in an era where enthusiasts appreciate uniqueness and nostalgia, these flaws have become part of its charm. Owners acknowledge the soft suspension, the heat-prone engine, the rust-sensitive body, the delicate transmission, and the mismatched car-based components, but they also celebrate the Champ for its rarity and its bold attempt to stand apart. Restoring one requires patience, resourcefulness, and respect for Studebaker's struggle to survive. Many restorers even embrace the truck's imperfections, using modern parts subtly to correct the issues while preserving the original feel. The Champ represents a lost chapter of American automotive history, a moment when a small company fought with everything it had to remain relevant. Understanding its defects is not an act of criticism but an exploration of the pressures, limitations, and creativity that shaped one of the most unusual pickups ever made. The deeper one looks into the Studebaker champ's history, the clearer it becomes that its defects were not isolated flaws but symptoms of a company caught between ambition and survival. Each mechanical weakness reflected a compromise, each structural issue a consequence of limited resources, and each engineering shortcut an attempt to stay afloat in a rapidly modernizing automotive landscape. The truck's 5 major defects, suspension weakness, overheating tendencies, rust vulnerability, steering instability, and drivetrain fragility, became defining characteristics, shaping both its reputation and its legacy. And yet, these flaws did not stop the champ from earning admiration. In fact, they help explain why the model is remembered with a sense of affection rather than disappointment. As time passed, owners developed a kind of partnership with the champ. They learned to anticipate its quirks, adjust their driving habits, and create workarounds for problems the factory never fully solved. It was a truck that rewarded careful maintenance and punished neglect. Those who treated it gently found that it could deliver years of dependable service, especially for light-duty use. It was not a farm brute or a construction site companion like the Ford F-Series or Chevrolet C/K, but it was a capable delivery truck, a comfortable commuter, and a stylish alternative for buyers who wanted something different. In a strange way, the champ appealed to a niche before niches were common in the automotive world. It was a truck for people who did not necessarily need a truck, and that unique positioning is part of why it stands out today. Many mechanics who worked on the champ during the 1960s remember the vehicle fondly, even while acknowledging its shortcomings. They recall how the car-based components made certain repairs easier, how the engine bay was spacious enough to accommodate careful servicing, and how the parts sharing with the Lark made sourcing some components straightforward. But they also remember the frustrations, the rusted bolts, the sagging front suspensions, the overheated radiators, and the transmissions that performed best when treated with respect. Local garages in cities like South Bend, Chicago, and Detroit saw a steady trickle of champs come through their doors, often in the same states of wear. These patterns helped cement the truck's reputation as one that required attentive upkeep. It did not have the resilience of its competitors, but it had charm, and to many, charm mattered. Collectors often comment that the champ feels like a truck designed by people who understood cars better than trucks. The interior ergonomics, the steering feel, and the ride quality all point to Studebaker's expertise in passenger vehicles. The company had spent decades building sedans that emphasized comfort, simple maintenance, and distinctive styling. Translating these values into a pickup created a vehicle that was enjoyable to drive but struggled with the demands of work. The champ reflected the identity of a manufacturer that had always marched to its own beat. It offered sliding rear windows, airy cabins, and comfortable seats at a time when most pickups remained bare-bones machines. For city-based small business owners, this was a welcome blend of utility and comfort. For rural buyers or heavy laborers, it fell short. The truck lived in a middle ground, appreciated by those who valued character over toughness. As years passed and Studebaker's financial picture deteriorated even further, problems with quality control compounded some of the champ's defects. Later production years saw inconsistencies in assembly, with fit and finish varying from truck to truck depending on available materials and workforce conditions. Some champs left the factory with misaligned panels, uneven body seams, or electrical quirks that required immediate attention. The rust issues became even more pronounced as cost-cutting measures affected metal treatments. Owners who bought the truck new in the early 1960s sometimes reported that the vehicle aged prematurely compared to competitors, especially in harsh climates. Yet, owners who lived in milder regions or kept their trucks garaged experienced far fewer problems, demonstrating how sensitive the model was to environment and maintenance. For those who experienced the champ during its original production years, the truck came to symbolize both the promise and the struggle of Studebaker. It was a last attempt to stay relevant in a market increasingly dominated by companies with deeper pockets and larger engineering teams. The champ arrived during a time when consumer expectations were changing rapidly. Buyers expected more power, better handling, longer-lasting durability, and stronger structural performance. Unfortunately for Studebaker, the resources to meet those expectations simply weren't available. The company attempted to modernize with clever ideas, like incorporating the Lark front clip and adopting Dodge's wide sliding window bed, but these innovations could not fully mask the underlying mechanical and structural shortcomings. In the decades that followed Studebaker's exit from the automotive industry, the Champ's reputation underwent a transformation. No longer compared directly with Ford and Chevrolet trucks in showrooms, the Champ began to be appreciated on its own terms. Enthusiasts started to view the truck not as a failed competitor but as a surviving artifact of a small automaker's ingenuity. The defects that once frustrated owners became subjects of fascination. They reflect the engineering compromises of an era and the desperation of a company fighting to remain alive. Restorers today often speak with respect about the Champ, acknowledging its weaknesses while admiring its uniqueness. They enjoy the challenge of correcting factory flaws and preserving the truck's character. Modern restoration efforts often focus on addressing the very defects that define the Champ. Suspension upgrades are common, with many owners installing stronger springs, reinforced control arms, or modern bushings to mitigate the softness of the original setup. Cooling system improvements are almost universal, with owners fitting larger radiators, better thermostats, or electric fans to control the chronic overheating issues. Rust repair is frequently the most extensive task, requiring skilled metalwork to rebuild cab corners, fenders, door bottoms, and bed sides. Transmission upgrades are also popular, with some enthusiasts replacing the fragile factory units with more modern and durable alternatives. These updates allow the Champ to function more reliably in modern driving conditions while preserving the vintage aesthetic. Despite these improvements, many restorers choose to keep the Champ as close to original as possible. They see value in its authenticity, imperfections included. For them, the truck's quirks are part of its identity, reminders of a time when the automotive world was more diverse, when smaller manufacturers could still contribute unusual and memorable designs. Driving a Champ today is not about speed, power, or rugged durability. It is about experiencing an artifact of American independence in engineering. The sound of its Studebaker engine, the feel of its light steering, the slightly soft ride, and even the peculiar way its cab resonates over bumps, all of this creates a driving experience unlike any other truck of its era. The Studebaker Champ also occupies a special place in the hearts of pickup collectors because it represents the end of something. It was Studebaker's last true attempt at a competitive pickup truck. When the South Bend plant closed in late 1963 and production shifted to Hamilton, Ontario, the writing was already on the wall. Only a small number of Champs were produced during the final months before Studebaker ceased all vehicle production in 1966. This makes surviving examples especially rare today. The scarcity enhances their charm, as does the sense of melancholy attached to the brand's final chapters. Collectors know that each Champ is a piece of a disappearing story, a symbol of a once thriving American automaker struggling against overwhelming odds. It is important to recognize that the Champ's defects did not arise from incompetence. Studebaker's engineers were talented and creative. They developed clever solutions within extreme limitations. Many of the truck's problems were the unavoidable result of trying to stretch existing components beyond their intended purposes. If Studebaker had enjoyed the financial stability of Ford or General Motors, the Champ could have evolved into a truly competitive pickup. But history took a different path, and the truck that reached consumers was one built from compromise and urgency. Yet, that is precisely what makes it fascinating. Its flaws tell a story of human effort, corporate struggle, and the challenge of innovation under pressure. The 5 major defects associated with the Champ continue to be discussed not because they define the truck negatively, but because they help explain its place in history. The weak front suspension reminds enthusiasts of Studebaker's reliance on car-based components. The overheating tendency reflects the challenges of adapting engines and cooling systems for heavier-duty use. Rust issues tell the story of cost-cutting and material shortages. Steering instability highlights the mismatched engineering between car and truck components. Transmission fragility speaks to the limited resources available to develop truck-specific drivetrains. These flaws collectively paint a portrait of a vehicle that was trying to be something it was never fully built to be. Even so, the Champ endures. It lives on in garages, restoration shops, farmyards, classic car shows, and private collections across the United States and beyond. Owners share stories online, exchanging advice on repairs and restoration techniques. Clubs dedicated to Studebaker vehicles welcome Champ owners with enthusiasm, celebrating the truck's uniqueness. For those who have driven one, the experience leaves a lasting impression. The Champ feels simultaneously familiar and unconventional. It captures the spirit of an era when the automotive world was more varied, when creativity could still make its way into production even in the face of overwhelming commercial challenges. To truly understand why the Studebaker Champ remains beloved today, one must look beyond the defects. The flaws are part of the narrative, but they are not the full story. The Champ represents resilience, individuality, and the determination of a small company refusing to give up. It carries the personality of a vehicle designed against the odds. Its strengths and weaknesses are inseparable, forming a character that sets it apart from more conventional trucks of the era. It may not have been the strongest or the most durable, but it had heart, and that is why it endures in the memory of enthusiasts. In the end, the Champ's 5 major defects serve as reminders of its humanity. They reveal the struggle behind its creation, the limitations its engineers faced, and the resourcefulness they displayed. Today, collectors embrace these imperfections as essential elements of the truck's identity. The Studebaker Champ stands as a testament to the idea that even flawed machines can earn admiration, loyalty, and affection. Its legacy is not defined by what it failed to do, but by what it attempted to achieve. It remains one of the most distinctive pickups ever built, a relic of a bygone era of American automotive ambition, and a symbol of the beauty that can be found in imperfection.